to start, we'd like to do an acknowledgement of country. So in the spirit of reconciliation, Monash University acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community over time. So we pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who may be with us today. Thanks, Colleen. Next slide.
Great, so here's the agenda. That's what we're going to cover today. So let's kick off first of all with the round of introductions. So my name is Lisa Mitchell. I am the Director of Development for University Fundraising, and myself, along with my team, look after 8 different faculties under that portfolio, but we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Heather, over to you.
Yes, hello everybody. I recognise some faces, so welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Heather Little and I'm the Deputy Director of Development for Humanities, Arts and Social Sciences. So I only cover 4, maybe 5 faculties in my role. Federico?
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to a meeting. I'm Federico Marcon, the Deputy Director of Foundation Relations. So my team manages the relationship with some of the large domestic and international philanthropic foundations, and we also look at some of the new innovative funding streams, and I will touch base on that later on during my presentation. Over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nikita Rodriguez. I have just started here in the development team. So working with Heather, Lisa and the team to support university fundraising.
Very excited. Nikita's day 3, I think, 4.
Week 2. Pretty much week 2.
Week 2, day 1.
And some of you may have met Belinda in the past, who is our development writer, but today we are joined by Sam.
Hi everybody, good afternoon. Yes, I'm Sam Green and I'm on Belinda's team, the development writing team. So we work on preparing the written documents for ERDA.
Thanks, Sam. So we want to be really informative and interactive and really useful for you today. So if you've got questions, please put them in the chat, because we'll leave some time at the end for Q&A. And today we're really going to cover what is philanthropy, how to cultivate a philanthropic relationship with an individual, how to successfully engage with our trust and foundations, both in the domestic and global arenas, how to craft that winning philanthropic narrative. And this is normally the point I say, Sam, that Belinda, our writer, has had 100% success rate with her proposal. So Sam, you've got to, step up into big shoes here. No pressure. We talk about gift acceptance and fulfilment. And really, most importantly, how we work successfully with our faculty colleagues, especially in regards to philanthropic funding for research. We're going to be sharing the slide presentation and also some resources afterwards as well, and clearly the recording. Next slide. Thanks, Colleen. Okay. So for those of you who haven't worked out the wonderful acronym of ERDA, it stands for External Relations, Development and Alumni, and we report directly to the Office of the Vice-Chancellor, and our division has responsibility for all external facing engagements with donors, alumni and other key stakeholders. So that's our primary purpose. In development, which is the philanthropic focused area of ERDA, we look to collaborate with our academic leadership to identify, nurture, secure and steward our philanthropic relationships across the university. And to do this really effectively, because as you can imagine, the university is a very large place, we have different portfolio areas. So as I've explained, under my portfolio area, we have all of the STEAM faculties. So that's the HAS faculties, and we also have engineering and IT and science. And then there's a director of health sciences, my colleague Marita O'Callaghan, and under that portfolio, it's all of the health sciences. So it's pharmacy, medicine, and the clinics and the hospitals. So again, a huge remit. So between those two portfolio areas, that's what we look after. And for good measure, we also have the Contemporary Gallery and the Cultural Precinct and the library. So have I left anything out? And
No,
that will probably do.
Yeah.
So you may or may not know, but in 2018, the university launched its first ever philanthropic fundraising campaign called Change It for Good. And we launched that with 3 goals. Firstly, to raise $500 million to build a community of 50,000 donors and to double the number of bequests by the end of 2022. Now, we closed out that part of our campaign in 2021, which was our funds raised, where we were sitting at 714 million. What we've now done is extended that campaign to, I'm going to say this, a little eye-watering target, an ambitious target, by 2025 of $1 billion. Now, if we reached that any earlier, we would have reached $1 billion sooner than our colleagues at Melbourne or Sydney University would have done in the time their campaigns were running. We're not competitive at all. We intend to reach that target. We are on track to do so, and we will talk further about what that looks like in terms of our philanthropic relationships. I think now we have, and you'll be the first people to see this publicly, unless you've been onto LinkedIn and seen it. This is our new video, which highlights the next phase of our campaign, which is changing it for future generations. So leveraging off the university's branding that you would have seen, we've now updated our campaign refresh to be reflective of this. And Carleen, let's hope this works.
Fingers crossed. Let's do this.
Look how far we've come. We create, innovate, and progress humanity. But take a step back, and what else do you see? The climate is in disarray, and entire ecosystems are disappearing. We're divided from gender to race to religion and politics. We continue to consume things we know we shouldn't and follow rather than lead. Even a single virus can bring an entire city to its knees. And while we don't know exactly what the future holds, we do know that it won't be us who have to deal with the consequences, but those who inherit the world from us, our future generations. At Monash, we're already addressing the biggest challenges facing our world. But more importantly than that, we have the people, the scale, the scope, the expertise, and the passion to solve them. And with the generous and transformative backing of our philanthropic partners and supporters, we will continue to make real progress, drive meaningful change through the highest quality educational programs and impactful research on a global scale. We're changing it for good. Together, we can do so much more. Join us to create a world where the next generation can thrive.
Thanks, Carleen. Now, I'm not sure if everyone could hear the dramatic music. It was a little quiet at our end, but we'll definitely send you a link through to that so that you can get the full impact of that. Sorry, somebody's trying to reach me on a Zoom phone, which is highly annoying. So we're really excited about the next phase of campaign, and certainly it's an all of university collaboration and driven from the Vice-Chancellor, who has a deep interest in seeing our philanthropic base grow. So what is philanthropy? Well, it can be defined many, many ways, but essentially it's an altruistic desire and active effort to help people through, as Heather likes to say, giving of time, talent, or treasure. A philanthropic gift is given without restrictions, so there's no expectation of a benefit being given in return, and that becomes quite important when we look at the definition of what is a philanthropic grant, what is a philanthropic gift, and other funding sources. And we often say that our donors aren't giving to Monash, but giving through Monash to realise their ambition. And we pride ourselves on co-creating mutually beneficial partnerships and understanding so that we know what motivates an individual to give. Because the more we understand about a donor's motivation, the more likely we are to deeply engage them in a partnership that delivers sustainable impact for the long term. So, for example, and this is to take nothing away from our wonderful trusts and foundations engagement pace, but often trusts and foundations will they have to give away money, they will give away money, but it's a longer process to engage them on that ongoing basis. With an individual, it might take, for some individuals, it's been a 5-year journey to get them to be engaged deeply with the university, but once they are invested, it is much easier for us to keep them engaged because we have that deep understanding with them. I'm going to get Heather to take you through the donor cycle now.
Brilliant, thanks Lisa. And yes, this lovely infographic might be a little bit small, but hopefully you can all see it. And as I say, obviously we'll share this with you afterwards as well. And there's a little kind of example across the bottom there of what all the little houses and light bulbs mean. So take the time just to kind of have a look over that. So yes, as Lisa mentioned, the role of philanthropy really is to enable projects or research to happen that otherwise would not have been possible. We see philanthropy as a real enabler. And so our role in ERDA is to frame needs, to facilitate donations, and to really foster a philanthropic culture, which is why we're rolling out these workshops and speaking to you today, because philanthropy is now everybody's responsibility. And I think certainly we would love to collaborate with you on achieving our $1 billion ambitious goal. So I'm going to briefly take you through this infographic, and we're going to start out with identification and research. So where do our prospects come from? So you'll see that we do have a prospect research team in ERDA who look at publicly available information and provide us with profiles and details on who might be interested in starting a conversation with Monash, what's their affinity to Monash, what's their propensity, what's their capacity to give a major gift to the university. We also find people through introductions, through advocates, through industry events, whatever that might be, and also, but we find that really the best success and kind of where we're getting the most traction at the moment is through academic connections and networks, because obviously you will most often know who's in your network, who's in your sphere of influence, and who might be interested in supporting your area of work. So we're certainly seeing, and some of the case studies that we'll touch on today certainly highlight that. So that's where we get a lot of our prospects and donors from. Qualification is the next stage. So that's understanding really what is a donor's motivations and what's their links to the university. During this stage as well, we'll also probably get a little bit more research on an individual or a trust and foundation. This might also be a really important point as well to do some due diligence, because obviously we take that very seriously, and there are certain groups and organisations that we may not accept donations from, or we may need to prepare should there be any issues in accepting a donation from a certain person or organisation. So that's a really important point when we just start to kind of build out a profile of who the person is, what their interests are, and how we can start to engage them. The next step is cultivation. So that's the step after we've started just to build a strategy and understand what a donor's motivations are. So this is the opportunity now to really align the donor's values with the passion areas and their passion areas with those of the university. So creating that real shared value proposition that really helps to articulate the impact that Sam will touch on later, and also determines that really powerful emotional reason to give. And this is the stage where we'll work with other stakeholders across the university. So we have examples where we work very closely with Carleen and Trudy and the team in the research office. That's really important, and we'll touch on that later. But also we have examples whereby we work with the dean, we work with other faculty executives like faculty general managers, or kind of the media office. We also work with research offices, and in some cases the vice chancellor and chancellor. Then moving on to solicitation. So if we've done all of the previous steps right, then solicitation shouldn't be a surprise. It should be, we're making the right ask at the right time, and the right person is making that ask. So again, we work really closely to make sure that we have built a really robust case for support, that the donor feels really engaged, they're ready to be asked at the right level. and also that goes as well for trust and foundation submissions. So often we'll move through the stages a little bit quicker with trust and foundation submissions, but obviously we're still getting to that solicitation point where we're making the right ask at the right time. If all that goes really well, then we'll move into stewardship, but at the solicitation stage, we do produce a gift or a grant agreement. A gift agreement is a gift that is purely given for philanthropic reasons and to kind of, to make a difference, to see real world change. And a grant agreement is very similar, but can come with terms and conditions. So usually we find that a foundation or a corporate partner, for example, will often want a grant agreement because they'll want to see certain milestones reached. And that's something that our donor relations team works on in collaboration with us. And also then in the stewardship part of this journey, also then helps to manage the relationship. So they're really involved in the gift implementation and fulfillment that we'll come to later on. They work on the invoicing. They also work on impact reporting, etc., to make sure that we're utilising the donor's gifts for the purposes in which it was given, and we're really showcasing and articulating the impact that the gift has made. In terms of philanthropic grants, again, we work with the research offices and make sure that those gifts are being fulfilled and administered in the right way. And then if all of this has gone really well, then we should get to a stage where we go to renewal, and hopefully we can renew or uplift gifts as they move through the process. So really our goal is to build long-term, sustainable, meaningful partnerships of impact, and you'll probably hear that from your dean as well. He's a great advocate for that, and to really showcase the impact of philanthropy, because philanthropy, as Lisa said, is a really social act that involves deep and meaningful relationships, and this is why collaboration and co-curation is really important. Yeah. So, sorry, Lisa, are you going to say anything?
I'm just going to add to, when Heather mentioned the gift agreement or the philanthropic grant agreement stage, we are often in a lot of toing and froing with OGC and tax. They always have to look at the agreements to make sure that we're meeting the conditions. And we also then have a lot of dialogue with the research office. So Carleen and I have been working recently on a lot of back and forward and to and fro on a particular agreement. And that can process, I should point out, can take a couple of weeks, if not up to a month. It can be quite lengthy. But we are looking at ways that we can shorten that period. Thanks, Heather. I just thought I'd mention that.
Really useful, thank you. And so over to Federico. Next slide, please.
Maybe before we move into trust and foundation, is there any question on the chat? Is there any question that you want to ask on this first part of the presentation?
Nothing in the chat.
Nothing in the chat. Excellent. Yeah, so if we can move to the next slide, and before I kind of dive into the next slide, maybe I wanted to give you some kind of data and statistics on the current philanthropic landscape when we talk about philanthropic institution. So currently globally, we have more than 260,000 philanthropic institutions. So let's say, trust and foundation around the world. And they currently manage assets over $1.5 trillion, and they disburse money around 150 billion per year. So we are, looking at a sector that has been growing quite extensively in the last few years. And Monash has, we have a great database of trust and foundation we've been engaging over the years. But just to give you an idea, in our current database, we got 1,600 trust and foundation. So 1,600 trust and foundation. So as you can imagine here, and this is what really excites us, there are a lot of opportunities potentially to engage with some new partners or some partners that have been established recently, because also it's a market that has been growing in the last 25 years. So out of these 260,000 foundations, 70% of these foundations have been established in the last 25 years, which is probably a consequence of one thing that is probably not great for our society, which is the wealth that is basically concentrated among the elites. So again, from a socioeconomic point of view, not ideal. From a philanthropic point of view, of course, this is opening a lot of new opportunities. Look, education in the global landscape, education, generally speaking, is attracting 35% of the total investment, but higher education, unfortunately, is no longer the top destination For the traditional philanthropy foundation, of course, I mean, we're kind of investing much more in better, but again, there are some kind of nuances on better. And one of the nuances is that out of the 260,000 foundations, 60% are based in Europe and 35% are based in the US. So there are two very kind of dominant markets, but are new emerging markets, especially Asia and the Middle East. But in these markets, probably higher education doesn't tend to be a priority, I would say, especially in the Middle East, probably because of the lack of high-level universities in that area, because of course, most of the foundation, they tend to invest their money locally. The Australian market has been on the rise, and there is a projection that it will grow over 1% more than it has done in the last 20 years. And we put here a couple of examples of large Australian foundations, so the Paul Ramsay Foundation and the Minderoo Foundation. So they used to be smallish organization with less than 10 employees, and now they're looking at almost 100 employees. What they're doing, which I think is very relevant for the work we do, they're creating a lot of internal capability. So they've got technical teams dedicated to interact with institutions like Monash or charities, and they want to build their own capability. So they are kind of moving from being a kind of traditional funders. They really want to be part of initiatives. So this is where you will hear us talking a lot about co-design and co-creation, because some of these large foundations, they're really keen to do so. Which means, I mean, on our side, we just need to look at their strategy, their priorities, and do a lot of preliminary work to align what we do with what they do. And I'm quite new to Monash, but I have to say one of the advantages of working here is our strategy, Impact 2030. Impact is the key word for any engagement with funders, and also the three challenges that we do have: climate change, thriving communities, and geopolitical security. Especially the first two, I would say, they resonate very well with what most of the foundation are really looking into. So we're kind of trying to move from a kind of traditional recipient position where we go there and we put our application and we try to get money. There is much more of a co-creation, co-design phase, which of course requires a lot of engagement, not only from ERDA, but also from all parts of the university. And you will play a very key role, not only kind of preparing application to get money, but also helping us position ERDA as a partner of choice for all these funders. Next slide, please. And so here you can see some of the kind of large partners. You also there are some new kind of funding streams or funding business model that we're looking into. So there is one here, Level for Change. So there are some what we call coalition of philanthropic funders. So funders that get together and they put money into a specific initiative, and most of the time they don't put a lot of framework around this initiative. They just say, come to us with a fantastic idea, and if we like the idea, we will get pool money from different funders to fund the idea. So there are probably 4 or 5 of these opportunities we're looking into at this stage, where you basically, the initial step is go there, discuss the idea, and of course it requires a lot of relationship management, and also to have this kind of groundbreaking idea that can really persuade the funders to get together and fund the idea. And we're talking about significant amount of money, so we're looking at something between 10 and 50 million US dollars if one idea really deserves to go to the next stage. There is also another part of what we are looking into, which is all the kind of impact investing and investment fund area. This is something that we are currently discussing with enterprise, because again, apart from the traditional philanthropy, there is quite a lot of funding, especially in some areas, and climate change is a good example, where investors, they want to invest in projects and look at what they call the social return on investment. So there must be a financial return on investment, but sometimes this return on investment is not very significant, but the social return on investment is really what they're looking into, which again goes back to our strategy of Impact 2030. And as you probably know, and I think there is someone from your faculty, which is part of the Impact Working Group that Monash has established recently, really trying to promote a common understanding and concept of impact across all the faculties and across all the different teams. So when we talk to external donors, we know exactly what we mean when we talk about impact. Next slide, please. So here you can see the Australian philanthropic market, according to the latest data. So last year, it disbursed 942 million Australian dollars. So we are reaching almost the 1 billion mark. And you can see here, there are just a few philanthropic institutions that disburse more than 100 million per year. You know, the Australian market has a little bit of a reputation of being very fragmented and with not a lot of players. Of course, if you compare it with the European and the US market, it might be true, but you can see here that there are a lot of kind of significant players. And of course, over the past years, we have engaged with pretty much all of them or most of them. There are some players that have been working with Monash in the past, and they're probably keen to move to a kind of different level of partnership. But this is something that we really need to work through, because of course we're looking at the domestic market, we're looking at the international market, and we probably want to come up with a list of the top 20 funders we want to engage with, because for each of them there is, what we're developing is a specific engagement plan where we ask different parts of the university to really be part of this journey. And just to give you an example, tomorrow night we have a meeting with Welcome, which has been one of our main partners. And so Rebecca Brown, our DVCR, she will present some of the emerging initiative and emerging programs that we would like Welcome to potentially partner with us in the future. So this is something that requires a lot of work, and that's why we're kind of focusing on the top 20 at this stage, because otherwise we wouldn't have the resources to engage with more than that. Next one, please. And so, of course, I mean, there has been quite a lot of success, and you know, the team here has worked really hard in the last years, and we have, as I said, partnership with most of the domestic foundation and also with some of the large international foundation. I guess in my team, our specific role is really to look at the large opportunities, to look at those trust and foundation that require a lot of relationship management and engagement. We also work with the research office on what we call, you know, the open rounds for grants. And this is an area where we still need to do some more, because basically the, you know, MRO, they are responsible for pretty much all the open grant calls, but there are some specific donors that require some preliminary intelligence insight and also probably relationship management before we just submit an application, because otherwise our chances would be very slim. This is a work in progress at this stage, because also in the research office, of course, they are overwhelmed, and as you know, with a lot of application for all the research grants and government grants. And so we want to really kind of point out what the main opportunities are in our space, and it will be a really close collaboration between my team and the research office. And probably just to wrap up, what we can offer to you guys, and it's very similar to what Heather was presenting in terms of the donor cycle. It is, you know, Prosper Research. We've just completed some research on the top 75 funders. We are looking into, of course, relationship management. We want to make sure that we do understand what the donors' priorities and strategy is, and so we can really choose the best programs and the best initiatives we can start discussing with them. And I think, you know, when we come into the game, it's really to start this priorities alignment and co-creation phase with the funders before we move into, you know, prepare a project proposal for funding. This is the second stage of our engagement, but we will definitely reach out to you and we will engage with you on the first stage, which is really not only for getting funding, but it's also for brand visibility and positioning Monash as a partner of choice for some of the top global funders. And we will be doing this also with a lot of people, researchers and partners in some of the other campuses we have, because of course, especially when you look at global funders, some of them are really focused on working in developing countries. And so, of course, you know, our campuses, and well, especially Indonesia, Malaysia, you also know that we have partnership in India and China. We've got some shared partnership there. This is where sometimes some of the funders, they really need to see that we got footprint and partnership opportunity and expertise and knowledge coming also from these countries. I think this is it from me.
Yeah, that's brilliant, Federico. I was just going to say, you know, obviously Federico's really outlined kind of what his team focuses at the moment, but obviously we continue to work in collaboration with Federico's team and obviously in collaboration with the research office, and probably we'll touch on that a little bit later on as well, just around how we actually do that and kind of what, how we activate each different kind of team member accordingly. Lisa, I don't know if you've got anything to add to that before we move on to Sam.
Only to say that the Vice Chancellor, and particularly with Rebecca Brown and her office, and also too with Sharon Pickering and the portfolio of DVCE, are really looking at those programmatic partnerships, those big cross-disciplinary blended funding model, global opportunities that really speak to Monash's strengths. And Federico and my colleague Danny and the team are working closely with the Office of DVCR on identifying and nurturing those opportunities as well. And as Federico said, it'll be about bringing in the expertise across the university onto those bigger bids as we move through. Thank you. Were there any questions in the chat for Federico?
Nothing at the moment.
Nothing so far. Nobody said, how can I find $1 billion from Welcome Trust?
The other thing I was just going to say, I mean, we'll just wrap up that section and move on to Sam, because I can see Sam is keen to get going and we're keen to hear from Sam, is that, yes, obviously, these large opportunities are really integral to the university's success and delivering upon Impact 2030 and addressing those grand challenges. But equally, here in the ERDA team and in the philanthropy development team, we're working on opportunities from $25,000 upwards as well. So not to discount any of those, when you initially started out and thinking about philanthropy, obviously we want you to be ambitious, we want you to think big, but from tiny acorns, oak trees grow. There we go. That's my analogy of the day.
Lovely.
Thank you. So welcome for that. Over to you, Sam.
Thank you, Heather. I love the analogy. That's good. And it's a good segue into talking about the kind of content and things, language we use, and the kind of writing we want to use when we're creating a philanthropic narrative. Could we go to the next slide, please? So that's what I'm going to talk to you about today, creating a philanthropic narrative. I'm one of the team's 2 philanthropic proposals writers. And basically our job on the team is to create documents that inspire excuse me, potential donors to give to Monash. So we partner with researchers like yourselves to create 2 main types of document for donors. So you can see them there, the case for support and the proposal. These are quite similar, but there's a key difference, I think, between them. But essentially, so a case for support is when we have an established project with philanthropic appeal that we want to showcase to a range of donors. Whereas with a proposal, it's when we have a specific donor in mind who's ready to make a gift, and they've given us permission to present them with an official proposal. So they're similar in the content we talk about, but obviously the proposal can be more tailored and more specifically directed to a particular donor, whereas the case for support is much earlier on in the process. It needs to be kind of appeal to a broader audience, so we don't know exactly who the audience will be. So today,
sorry, so I'm just going to add in there that on the proposal too is normally when we include a budget, a detailed budget, and again that's a really important part of the work that we do with Carleen and team is we need that advice on what that budget looks like, and again provide those specifics. Thanks, Sam.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. So whereas with the case for support, we don't usually have a budget at that stage. We're just being a bit more general about what's the project about, why should we care about it. So today I'm going to take you through the case for support. I won't focus on the proposal. You'll have access to a case for support template after the presentation. So that's a Word document that kind of tells you the kind of content we want to put into a case for support. So over the next 10 minutes, I'm going to touch on some key points about a case for support and how it's different, in particular from, say, an ARC grant application. I've worked on grant applications as well, so I'm in a good position to sort of tell you the differences between grant writing and this kind of case for support. Next slide, please. So with any piece of writing, we like to say you have control over 3 things, which is what you say, so that's the content, that you put in there, the order in which you say it, that's the structure of your document, and then how you say it, that's the specific language, word choices that you put into the document. And so let's take a look at these three elements for a case for support, specifically a philanthropic case for support. So first up, what you say, the content. Now, if you're writing an ARC grant application, the content is very zoomed in to the details of your project. So the judging panel wants to be reassured in painstaking detail that your project shows academic rigor, that your methodology is robust, that each researcher on your team has an exceptional track record, all that kind of stuff that you'd probably be familiar with in grant applications. Whereas in a case for support, it's all about zooming out to the big picture, that surrounds your project. So this is because a donor wants to know that by giving a gift, they made the world better in some way. So the donor, of course, wants to know some of the details of your project, but they really want to know about what the problem is that you want to solve in the world, how your project's going to help solve that problem, and kind of the ultimate impact your project could make in the lives of real people. So that's the big picture stuff that we talk about more than you would in a grant application. So that's very briefly the difference in terms of what you say, the content that we want to put in there. The next slide, I'll talk about number 2, which is the order in which you say it, i.e. the structure. Next slide, thanks. So the order that we want to talk about it in is quite important. So you can see there, I've highlighted the challenge is the first section that we talk about, and the ultimate impact of the gift is kind of the last section we talk about. I wanted to mention first and last because that's really the thing that will stick in your audience's mind the most, is what they first read and what they lastly read. Then the rest of it's important as well. But so these are the 5 core components that we put into a case for support. We'll share some resources with you after this with examples of cases for support. And you might see in those that we sometimes have extra bits and pieces, that it's not just these 5 sections necessarily, but these are the core components that we want to address in every case for support. So the first section is the challenge, which, for example, in terms of an education challenge, you might be trying to argue that we need to provide support for economically disadvantaged students during VCE to prevent educational inequality. So that's just one example of a challenge that you might talk about in a case for support. Now, of course, the challenge is always part of a grant as well, but grants often launch into their project first. It's like the central thing that they want to talk about is the project, whereas with a case for support, the challenge really needs to take center stage. So that's why we talk about it kind of first and last. And that's why we've got this hourglass image I put on the screen, is to kind of represent that we start with the big picture, the challenge, like I was talking about earlier, the big picture. Then we kind of move into the middle and we talk a bit more about some of the details, but then we zoom back out again at the end as well to kind of come back to the challenge in terms of the ultimate impact of your challenge, of resolving that challenge, how the gift is going to resolve that challenge. So that's the challenge. The second part is only after we've talked about the challenge do we get onto the project, talking about how your project will be part of the solution. Don't worry, we're not going to say that your project is going to solve everything, but it's part of the solution to that challenge. The third section, your credentials section, this is much less prominent than in a grant. We keep it shorter. There's no need for those academic stats like your publications, citations, H-index, all that kind of very jargonistic academic qualification type stuff. Often we just have 1 or 2 kind of short researcher bios or a little bit about why Monash is the best part of your project. But we keep it a bit less prominent, a bit shorter, although it's still important to make clear why we're a good partner that you might want to donate through. Section 4, the philanthropic invitation. This is obviously a bit different to a grant. We don't talk about philanthropic invitations in a grant. But this section, we articulate why the project needs philanthropic support and for what purpose. So why is it that we're seeking philanthropy, not just other sources of funding? We want to make that clear. And lastly, section 5, the ultimate impact of the gift, like I said, is really coming back to the start, talking about imagine the world once we've partially solved the challenge. What's the ultimate impact going to look like of that? So in summary, in terms of the structure, there are many similar elements between a grant and a case for support, but our structure places more emphasis on the challenge and the difference you hope to make in the world, and less emphasis on the technical details, the academic track record, and the credentials and that sort of stuff. So that's the structure. Next slide, please. Lastly, the third element I mentioned, how you say it, the language. With a case for support, the goal is to present a project to donors in a really clear, easy to understand way. And so lay language is important here, more important even. I think lay language is actually quite important in a grant application as well, in my experience, but it's even more important here. I'll just note, I mentioned proposals at the start of the other type of document. Proposals can be more tailored to a donor's level of expertise. So you might have a deeply experienced expert donor in the area. In their case, maybe a bit more jargon can be okay. You can talk about more technical terms. But for a case for support, definitely we want that more simple language that anyone could understand, because we need to be able to share it around with anyone. So language, simple language. Also, a case for support is much more personal than a grant application. So for a grant application, the judging panel is objectively assessing your project against hundreds of others. So it's a professional context. It can maybe be a bit cold or detached or objective. It is kind of the idea, at least, of what it's meant to be. Whereas with philanthropic gifts, particularly from maybe a private donor, it can be a very personal situation. So, for example, we've had donors, for example, like this, where they may have had a spouse who spent their life working in, say, the field of education, and the spouse recently passed away, and the donor wants to give a gift in honor and recognition of their spouse. So that can be very personal for them. So we can afford to be much more informal, emotive, human, and even visionary in our language in order to engage with someone like that. And in fact, being cold and detached might actually put the donor off more so. Whereas if you show a bit of humanity, a bit of emotion and informality, that can help to appeal to a donor. So those are the key differences between a case for support and a grant, in those three kind of categories. Next slide, please. So finally, I wanted to just kind of bring this to life for you a little bit by drawing your attention to an example. This is in the resources we'll share with you afterwards. This is a completed case for support for something called the XYX Lab. I won't take you through the whole thing now, but I'd encourage you to read it in your own time and see that while it's got unique elements, which many cases for support often do, it does reflect the three elements that I've talked about today. So the content is really focused on the big picture, goes into a lot less detail than a grant application. The structure does generally follow that trajectory that I showed you. And the language is quite different from traditional academic language. And also importantly, you'll see it's very much bookended with the big picture human relevance at the start and at the end. So this document specifically that we're looking at came to us as around 15 pages of text with quite detailed excerpts from grant applications. And the narrative went straight into talking about this XYX lab and what it does. So what we did, we cut the content down by at least half, and we ended up presenting it in a 10-page brochure. So it did expand in pages again after we halved it, but that's because we broke up the text with lots of images, as you can see, blown up statements to make it much more accessible and engaging than a traditional grant would be. As you can see, we started the case for support with the challenge, as you see right there. This was the first page. The challenge here was urban spatial inequity. And there's a quote in there: being able to move freely and safely around a city is a basic human right. And then we go on to explain that not everyone is able to access this basic human right. So that's the challenge that we're talking about there. And I want you to note as well, if you read over this, that whole first page, we're not talking about the lab at all. We're just painting a picture of the problem and why we should care about addressing that problem. Next slide, please. So this is still the same lab, just a different page. And there's a quote there at the start: imagine being able to walk freely through a city at any time, day or night, without feeling threatened or scared. At Monash, we want to make this a reality for every child and adult, regardless of gender. So I just wanted to pull this out as an example of, we're using more emotive language there, more visionary language, and really grounded in people's experience. We're talking about every child and adult walking freely through a city. That's an experience that we're grounding everything in. So that's important. Next slide, please. This is the last page of that example. And near the end, we say, we need the support of big thinking visionary philanthropists. Join us as we work towards a future in which cities are safe for everyone. So again, rather than focusing on the lab itself, we've capped things off here at the end with the idea of changing the outcomes for real people, making cities safe for everyone. So yeah, just wanted to show you those kind of 3 snippets from this specific case for support to see the kind of language, the kind of visuals, the kind of structure that we're using to tell a philanthropic narrative. So in summary, a case for support, the project itself doesn't need to be explained in as much detail, but in our content and our structure and our language, we have more emphasis on the bigger picture. Why should anyone care, and how will this kind of change lives? That's how we would like to structure our narratives and write our narratives, and that's what we want you to think about if you're filling in the template for the case for support, if you want to work with us. Thanks for your time, and happy to answer questions later. I'll hand back to Heather for now, though.
Thank you, Sam. Over to you, Lisa. You just wanted to wrap up
just a couple of comments, and thank you, Sam. It's a really great overview of crafting that narrative. There are a couple of other stages that sometimes we have employed. So Sam took you through today the case for support and the proposal and the difference between them. On some occasions, when we're really starting that initial discussion and co-creation, we might start with what is called a concept paper. So in fact, that's prior to even getting to the case for support. We've just got a really simple co-creation process with that donor around what it is we can do together to solve a problem. And then there are other times when we've used what we will call an ambition paper. And the ambition paper can come after the case for support, but before the proposal. So it's defining the thinking and refining the thinking a bit more before we move into a proposal stage. So we don't always go through those other 2 documents, but they also exist as well. And we have used them, in fact, with the Faculty of Education on a few occasions. Not to complicate things, you don't have to go through them, but they are really helpful documents as well. Thanks, Heather.
Thanks, Lisa. So next slide, please, Colleen. So as I touched on earlier, we do have a wonderful donor relations team who assist us with gift acceptance and fulfilment. And obviously we want to make sure that when we're accepting gifts, they fall under the definition of a gift with the ATO. It's quite timely at the moment, everybody doing their tax returns. And also to make sure that we can class gifts, grants as research under HERTZ guidelines. So just a couple of things, kind of 5 points here that we just always kind of look at, just to make sure that we are doing things responsibly and we're acting in the best interest of both the donor and obviously, of course, Monash as well. So is the funding eligible? As I said, does it meet the definition of a gift for tax purposes, or will it be a philanthropic grant, which, as I mentioned, can come with terms and conditions? Is it legal and ethical? As I mentioned at the start of a relationship, we'll usually undertake due diligence, which is really important. Do we understand what the source of the funding is, like the ultimate source of the funding? Is it coming from an individual? Is it coming from a trust and foundation? Is it coming from a private ancillary fund? All of those things, we just want to make sure that we're fully prepared for when we do come to accept the gift. And then, of course, as well, we want to make sure that it is strategically aligned with the university's goals and our policies and procedures, and that we make sure that we're going to be utilising it for the purpose in which it was given, which moves on to the feasible and adequate kind of step there, just to make sure that if we do accept a gift or a grant, we can actually utilise it for the purpose in which it was given, because there's nothing worse than going back to the donor at the end of something and saying, actually, we couldn't spend that money, or we didn't manage to meet the milestones that we promised in the case for support. So that can be a bit tricky. So we want to make sure that we're being upfront about all of that. And then, of course, if it is research, we want to make sure that it's fully documented on Pure. and that's all up and above board in the correct places. Carleen, I don't know if you want to add anything to that in terms of accepting philanthropic grants through the research office.
No, that covers it fine. Thanks.
Great, no worries. Next slide, please.
Should probably also point out that contract research does not fall under the philanthropic category, because that is perceived as a benefit being received. So therefore contract research goes through a different journey.
Thanks, Lisa. So this next one is really about how we partner with the research office, because that's a question that we often get asked. So like, kind of, when do people come to us? When do people go to the research office? When do they go to the MRO? And really, there isn't a simple answer, I suppose, to this. Federico touched on the relationship with the MRO earlier on in his presentation, and we work really closely with them now. We've got a fantastic relationship with them, and they mostly manage, as Federico said, all of the open grant calls that come to the university, and obviously they work in collaboration with the faculty research offices, and then also in collaboration with us should we have a pre-existing relationship with a trust and foundation, for example, or should there be an explicit request for a specific grant round whereby all of the applications have to come through us. So an example of where that happens is the Ian Potter Foundation. We have to manage all of the submissions for the Ian Potter Foundation. We also have to do that for the William Buckland Foundation, which is one that's available at the moment, one that's open at the moment. So how we work with Carleen and Trudy and the team is that we help to identify philanthropic opportunities, and that comes both ways. So often I might have an opportunity that comes across my desk, and I just make sure that Carleen and Trudy are across it, and vice versa. Carleen and Trudy might have had a conversation with one of you or your lovely colleagues, about an opportunity that's come across your desk, and what we'll do is we'll notify each other of it, and then we'll look to strategize and provide that strategic pitching advice. So kind of understanding what are the timelines that we need to adhere to, what are the objectives of the foundation, and as well coming back to individual philanthropy, which is really important and certainly a focus area, a priority focus area for us. That strategic pitching advice is when we might have someone who's interested in your line of work, and we really want you to kind of build the ambition and to tell the story of why your work is worth investing in and what the impact of that's going to be. So we spoke about support for grant calls, budget development support, Lisa touched on earlier. That's a really important one. So when we get to that proposal stage, it's kind of like, in the case of support, we might say, for example, $100,000 will help us to do X, Y, and Z. But then when we get to that budget development support stage, which is when we're actually getting down into the nitty-gritty of the proposal, it's actually, we're getting not necessarily down to the cents and dollars, because we don't nickel and dime philanthropy, but it's just about getting into, okay, for that $100,000, what is actually going to be delivered? What are the resources that are going to be enabled to make this research or to enable this project to come to fruition? So it's more getting into the granular detail of the resources. And then obviously the research office, we don't have access to Pure in our team. The donor relations team do, but only one person does. So we don't have access to Pure. So that's entirely down to our wonderful faculty colleagues and yourselves to make sure, as I say, that that's all recorded in Pure. So when we do get a successful grant or a gift through, that it goes through the correct approval processes. Carleen and Trudy, I don't know if you want to add anything in there.
Just from me, really, just to say that we, especially over this year, we're working really closely with Heather and Lisa, particularly at the very, very early stages, so that it's not just it's not just a we do the costing bit. It's very much a partnership where, like Heather said, where often we'll hear about something someone wants to do, or she will, and we work really closely from that kind of concept part with the team.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, Trudy, and I think certainly the sooner that we can be brought across opportunities and the sooner that we can start to collaborate, the better, because I think that helps with the philanthropic success, as the title of this presentation. I think one of the other things as well that certainly Carleen and I had a conversation around, and Federico and I just touched on it now, was what opportunities are we involved in? Kind of what's the threshold for us to be involved? And I did mention earlier that we are looking at focusing on very large opportunities, but anything from $25,000 and above. So as an example, we've had some grant rounds that have opened recently that might be in that kind of 15K mark. And I think it's still important for us to be aware and across some of these things, but we wouldn't necessarily be involved in providing the assistance on that. So in terms of writing the grant or supporting in any applications or conversations around that level, we are focused on $25,000 and above. So there's a number of kind of factors involved in it, and I would certainly say, you know, within reason, we still want to be kept across things, because it's just really important for us to have that bigger picture understanding. But really, our strategic focus is $25,000 and above.
And also, just to say, not everything that ERDA does can be classified as research. So we meet monthly, and the Louise Gould's DARE team are involved. Megan Lowe from our alumni person within the faculty. So there is a bigger group of faculty staff who meet with the ERDA team monthly so that we're all across what's going on. That's right, because we work on scholarships. We work on other kind of on the ground deliverable initiatives that might not necessarily be classed as research, might be founded in research, but you know, in terms of those deliverables, you know, on a specific grant for things like that, then might not be able to be classed as research. But we do always do our utmost, especially when we're going through MRO, to make sure that things can be classed as research, because we understand the importance of that.
And certainly on the bigger pieces, we will definitely work very closely with the research office, with the academics, with other stakeholders within the university and ourselves. So in a recent proposal we did that had several zeros in it, it required a lot of people to be involved with that proposition, including Sam. Belinda worked with us on that and helping to craft the grant narrative, or worked with us on that as well. So some of the bigger propositions will involve a lot of people and moving parts, and hopefully success at the end of it.
Absolutely. So next slide, please.
Okay, case studies. So we're not going to go into a huge amount of depth on these, but really just to give some top line examples, real life examples of how what we've been talking about today works in practice. So I guess what I'd like to say, particularly about the All Play program and the range of initiatives, is that Nicole and the team had established some really fantastic relationships with their donors. So a big part of the role we played when Nicole and team came to Monash was for us to engage with those donors. We had to build trust. So before we were talking about credentials, establishing Monash's credentials in supporting this work was really important. And then looking at what the impact of the programs moving forward could be, because a lot of the donors had been there from the beginning, and they were keen to know, well, what's the forward ambition? Where does this want to go? So we did a lot of work around looking at, let's establish trust, and then let's go on this journey. And particularly one of the donors who had been with Nicole from the very beginning, and with Anna at the very beginning of the journey, was because of his lived experience. So without going into too much detail, one of his family members has autism, and he was really keen in that work. And by being involved from the very beginning, he could see the difference that his philanthropy was making in terms of the program delivery. And when we talk about that deep engagement, that personal relationship, that's a perfect example of where you take a donor on that journey from the very beginning. They co-create those next steps. Without interfering, we would never let a donor dictate certain things, but we do like them to be involved. So it's that important feeling that their philanthropy is making a difference and an impact will then lead to those not only renewal and certainly investing further funding for programs and initiatives, but also this particular donor brought his network in. And that for us as frontline fundraisers is equally as important, because yes, we've got a relationship with this person, but then suddenly we have 5 more really exciting relationships because they've had such a great experience that they want others to be involved because they can see the impact that their gift has made. So All Play is a great example of that, and we are excited to have renewed I think about 95% of those donors, and we're working on a couple of others that have indicated their great eagerness to continue their journey. And we're just at the ambition paper stage and looking at where we can go with their investment and where that next stage is. So it's a really exciting cultivation piece that we've been working on with a really dynamic breadth of donors there. Anything else?
No, well, then Anna is on the Zoom and said,
Anna, does anyone want to say anything?
She put a little comment in the chat that I'm going to read out. It's just a bit self-gratuitous. It's very kind of Anna to say, but she said, "You've been brilliant establishing trust with all of our partners and donors, making our All Play research programs thrive at Monash." So, and I said, it's our absolute pleasure, Anna, to work with you, Nicole, and the team. It's just brilliant. Just makes our jobs really worthwhile. Just when we can absolutely see the impact that you're delivering through philanthropy. So, thank you.
No, thank you. And likewise, and I could see all of those stages and all the things that you've been discussing today.
Your lived experience.
That's right.
No, thank you, Anna. And it's such a great relationship that we have with you and with Nicole, because the more we can understand about your work and the more that Sam can understand about your work, the better we get at telling the story. Because essentially that's what we need to be able to do is to be able to tell that in the way that people will come on that journey and go, this is the best thing ever. I have to give you all my money because we need to do this. So that's our ultimate goal. So thank you as well. Heather, you're going to talk a little bit about the journey of Mike and the virtual school, which has been a wonderful opportunity as well.
Absolutely, yeah. It's been my great pleasure to work with Mike Phillips and the Monash Virtual School. And we started this one off, an introduction through Megan Lowe before Megan went on maternity leave, around this fabulous concept of the virtual school. And it was just an opportunity for us to start to build a case for support for this and start to understand what the ambition and the vision was for Mike and the team there. And this really inspired our thinking here in ERDA around who are the possible partners in this space, and someone who had previously given to Monash would have become what we might call a lapsed donor. So someone who, kind of stopped giving to Monash for whatever reason, and someone who we'd been wanting to look to re-establish a partnership with for a while, was the Invagari Foundation. Now, they have a real focus on supporting girls in STEM. And so we had the conversation with Mike about, okay, we understand the concept of the virtual school, but could it actually be drilled down? Could it actually be refined? Or could we actually have a focus on girls in STEM? And for those of you who know Mike, so amenable, so innovative. He was just like, yeah, absolutely, we can do anything, and came up with this fabulous concept to kind of really look at, okay, focusing on revision classes for VCE girls in STEM, and girls from rural regional communities, from disadvantaged communities. And this was a real opportunity for us to re-engage this lapsed donor, the Invagari Foundation. And we started out just with various conversations just around the concept. And then we involved the Dean from the very early stages in this. And we actually had a meeting downstairs here in the Chancellery with Viv and Mike and Kim from the Invagari Foundation, which was to kind of kick off the conversation around what support could look like. And they quickly, bought into the concept and was really excited by it, and came on board with an initial 6-figure gift. That was just a couple of years ago now. And so from then, obviously, we've stewarded the relationship, and Mike has been really an integral part of that stewardship. He's been really closely engaged with the Invagari Foundation, keeping them updated on the impact, keeping them updated on the vision and the ambition. And we recently invited the Invagari Foundation to the Dean's donor lunch, which was earlier on in the year. It was probably March or something like that, which was an opportunity just for the faculty just to thank all of the existing donors and to engage some of the key stakeholders in our donor community. And that was where Viv kind of first came out with the narrative that he wants to build long-term, sustainable, meaningful partnerships of impact. And that really inspired the Invagari Foundation to kind of say to us, okay, well, what's next? You're obviously delivering fantastic impact through the virtual school already. We can see that, and we think Mike is a superstar. What's next? And that really allowed us to lift the ambition of the Invagari Foundation, and to really look at, okay, well, what is it that we want to achieve over the next 5, eventually turned out to be 7 years. And what we've done is we've really taken the Invagari Foundation on a bit of a journey. Mike went to present to the board. Obviously, the Dean was the inspiration for this conversation, and we've now grown this partnership into a 7-figure plus partnership. So, you know, that, from my analogy earlier from tiny acorns, oak trees grow, this is a prime example of where that's happened. We're just yet to finalise all of that, but, you know, Mike has played an integral role in directly engaging with the donor, as has the Dean. So that's about working with and through stakeholders and bringing them in at the most appropriate times, and really showcasing to Invagari how over the long term they can really make a meaningful difference in this space. So that has been another fantastic example of collaboration with all of our faculty colleagues. You know, there's been lots of to and fro between myself and Carleen as well around the budget and those kind of things. So, you know, it's been a real collaborative effort to get to this stage. So thank you everybody for all of your efforts.
And I think this one's a great example of, with Carleen's expertise, where we've been able to work with the MRO to get advice to make sure that the whole thing can be classified as research.
Yeah.
I think initially the wording, and I'm not even sure if the first project was all classified as research, but, you know, working together, we've been able to get the whole lot classified. Hopefully, not done yet, but
yeah, not done, nearly there. So cone of silence. Yeah, no, just to make sure that it's, as I touched on earlier, that it's beneficial for the donor and beneficial for Monash and the researcher as well. That's really important. It's got to be a mutually beneficial partnership of impact.
Yeah. And another great example, and I need to shout out Anne, who I know is on the call today, as well as Carleen, and the work we've been doing with another corporate organisation that we pitched a very ambitious opportunity. We've started at a slightly lower level than perhaps we would have liked to have started, but we're confident, going back to Heather's analogy of acorn, large tree, we see this as an initial first step in what is going to be a much bigger opportunity. And it is around about that establishing trust, because, you know, particularly for individuals, this is their passion. This is their hard-earned cash. They're about to hand it over. It's around having that understanding that what we're going to deliver is going to be fulfilling for them to be involved in, and that trust part is really important. And as I said, with individuals, it can be a 5-year journey. We have a donor who we cultivated for 5 years before they gave their first gift of 25K. The second year he gave $1 million. We're now talking a really large quantum at the moment in a completely different area from where he started. And that's because he has a deep engagement with the university and can see all sorts of opportunities and has many passion points. So it's a complex but incredibly rewarding field to work in, where we can bring fantastic researchers and wonderful programs together with like-minded funders. I mean, how good does that get? It doesn't get any better, seriously.
Thank you, Lisa. So I think that's it from us, other than the final slide is question time. Over to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Anything in the
Nothing
chat?
in the chat so far.
Nothing at all from anyone? Any comments? Anybody who's been through the process? Anne or Anna, if there's anything else you wanted to add, or?
Oh, Gillian's got her hand up.
Yeah, hi everyone. I've got probably a related question. If we've got an idea, what is the actual process? You might have alluded to this or something, but it's gone in one ear and out the other. I do apologize. So if I've got an idea, do I contact you? We work it up so that you can see, oh yeah, there's something like that, girls in STEM or whatever. And we work it up, or do we wait for a call to come out to work it up, is the first part of the my question. So do you do like be proactive or preempt a call? The second part, though, is you've got your friend who started out at 25K, now he's over $1 million. How do you know that his 1 million is up for grabs or consideration and would align with any one particular research group within the university?
Two great questions, Gillian. Thank you for those. I'll take the first one. So there's two ways to look at that. So with an open grant round, you will know if your idea fits the criteria of the open grant round. However, having said that, as Federico mentioned earlier, they are looking at what are the key areas that that these funders are interested in. So we're doing a lot more behind the scenes strategic work to then say, well, where are our capabilities within the university within these areas? So where are our particular strengths? And then there's a marrying up that way. With philanthropists, it's slightly different process because it's a much longer process, as I've alluded to. But I would say drop us an email is the easiest thing often. It's like, here's my great idea, and we can go from there. Now, I'm not saying that everybody's great idea is going to have philanthropic interest, and we can give you that feedback fairly quickly and fairly honestly. But often great ideas will have interest, and we can work with you as to the next stages of that. Often that will be then working it up. So as Sam said, there's a template. We'd send you a template and you would go through and answer the questions, and then we can go from there. Anything to add there?
Yeah, maybe if I can just complement what Lisa has said. I guess, for us, what we see from the market is, as I was saying, there is a renewed appetite around potentially discussing big ideas, what is the best financial vehicle to fund this idea. So personally, in my space for trust and foundation, especially some of the global funders, if you have a great idea, I would actually recommend come to our team and say, guys, I was thinking, this is something I would like to do, blah, 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 blah. And then this is part of the conversation we can have with funders. And again, even if it doesn't result in funding for that great idea, I think this is part of what we like to pitch to our funders of Monash being a lab, a hub of new ideas. We want to be innovative, we want to be bold, we want to be ambitious, and da, da, da. So in some of the funding opportunities, we're actually looking into the ones that I was mentioning about coalition of funders. This is exactly what they're looking for. Come to us with a big idea, and let's discuss the big idea. And also some of the more established philanthropic institutions. And then I keep using Wellcome as an example. So the CEO of Wellcome told us, guys, don't just look at the open calls. If you have a great idea, come to us, discuss this with us, and this is exactly what we will be doing tomorrow night with Rebecca. Because if this is something that really inspires us, we can look at giving you funding outside of the kind of traditional model. So I would really encourage you to, if there is any idea, not only you, but everybody in the call, come talk to us, and then we can probably keep this in our kind of portfolio, big ideas that we might be discussing with a lot of different type of donors.
I agree with that, Federico, and I think Lisa Hunter has asked the same question as well in the chat about at what point do we talk to you. And I think certainly as soon as you have the idea, as soon as the concept is kind of sparked, project is sparked, reach out to myself, Lisa, Carleen, Trudy, just bring us across it. And often we're having conversations as well. So we can, as Federico said, it might not necessarily be a funding conversation initially, but we're often having conversations as well with people like Neil Selwyn, who's keen to kind of build bigger groups, to kind of build those big ambitious pieces. We can often signpost to the right area of the university. It might be somewhere else that we can help get traction with. So the sooner we know about it, the better. The sooner we can talk to you, the better. We can signpost, we can assist, we can start the ball rolling. And Robin just asked a question as well in the chat, is just understanding how we set the dollar amount and kind of what is the process for setting the dollar amount. And I've just responded in the chat there just to say, we can absolutely help articulate what the dollar amount should deliver. It's more about what is the deliverables, what is the impact, and what will be the philanthropic investment needed to make that happen. So we can absolutely, again, work with you and work with the research office around what the philanthropic investment level should be.
Yeah, and part two, your other question was, how do you go from 25K to $1 million? It is a great question, and that is very much part of the relationship management piece that we undertake. So that's the stewardship of the donor. So once we've got a gift, it doesn't just stop there. We have quite a rigorous renewal strategy. We look at how we can take these donors on a really deep engagement journey, so that we are looking at renewal and uplift. That's crucial for us. So I think, again, the All Play example is a really excellent one of that, with the incredible work that Nicole and Anna have done and the relationships that they have with all of their stakeholders. But also they let us know, well, they'll run ideas past us and they think, okay, well, this is where we want to go. How do we have those conversations? So we're here to provide very much that advice, and also to work with you collaboratively on taking that donor on a journey. So they're not interested in us particularly. We're just there to facilitate a lot of this. They're interested in you and the work that you're doing and the impact you're delivering. We just facilitate a lot of that. Does that answer that, Gillian, for you? Yeah, great.
I attended a conference a couple of weeks ago where the CEO of the Ian Potter Foundation was one of the keynote speakers. And he said, we're there to fund, we want to fund multi-year translational risky research. We don't want to fund failed ARC or NHMRC grants. We only want to fund outstanding opportunities by the best and the brightest, where their research aligns with the Monash strategic priorities, well, with the organizational strategic priorities as well. So I think it's, yeah, exactly what you were saying, not just a case of what your idea and how you can kind of force that onto the funder. It's, also thinking about very carefully what they want to, what their passions are and what they want to fund.
It's a great point, Trudy, and I think Federico might echo this as well, is that they're getting a lot more discerning. These funding organisations, they're wanting to see really deep ROI on their investments, and I think that's our role too, is to look at those ambitious pieces. How can we be ambitious? Another example, Heather and I worked on, and we can be public about this because it's out in the domain, we worked on a competitive philanthropic bid against Melbourne for the Centre for Consciousness and Contemplative Studies. Now, when the donor first came to us, they had quite a narrow focus, and it was just around putting contemplative studies into the curriculum, and that was it. But we brought together a range of stakeholders, and we worked very closely with the donor, and we had everyone from the Chancellor, Vice Chancellor, you name it, they were involved at the right time, the right engagement, and we took that donor onto a much bigger opportunity where they not only funded us at 12 million, they funded Melbourne at 10 million. So it's possible through the right engagement, through the right collaboration, to really lift ambition. And if people are investing, they want to be excited by it, Trudy. I think it's very true. They want to see that difference. They want to see that impact. Gone are the days it's like, here's the money, go away and do something with it. Federico, would you say that's true?
Yeah, no, I'm interested in Trudy. I think I was on the same conference, and you remember that the CEO of the Ian Potter Foundation, he also shared his personal experience and some of the challenges he went through, and he was kind of saying that this is also informing in a way how you approach philanthropy. So this is going back to what Lisa was suggesting in terms of relationship management and doing the kind of initial research to understand not only what the institution does, but also what the key decision maker in the institution, where they come from. And this is part of all the prospect research we do with individual philanthropists as well, with trusted foundation. That was a great example of someone, opening up in front of 100 people around his personal experience and, some of the challenges he had in the past.
Any other questions? Anything? No? Well, look, thank you all very much for the opportunity. We are deeply appreciative to be able to speak with you about how we can collaborate for philanthropic success. We look forward to working with all of you over time, and please don't hesitate to reach out either to myself or anyone in the team here, or of course to the research office, to Trudy and Carleen, and see where we can go from here. But I think what we're going to see in the funding landscape is that philanthropy is going to play an ever-increasing role in terms of allowing us to develop and deliver what we are currently doing. I think it's going to be tougher in the Category 1 market. So we look forward to assisting you in any way we can to ensure that we're changing it for future generations.